It was 00:47 a.m. when I realized I was the only person left on my floor, the only light still burning in a sea of glass and steel. My eyes stung from hours of staring at spreadsheets that blurred into a wall of meaningless numbers, but I couldn't stop. I had one night to fix what weeks of careless leadership had broken, and if I failed, it wouldn't just be my reputation. It would be the quarter, the bonuses, the client contracts, the fragile trust of people who had no idea how close everything was to collapsing. And yet, while I sat hunched at my desk with stale coffee and a pile of red lines, HR walked past me. She saw me. She stopped for half a second. And then she smiled, not at me, but at the sound of music drifting from upstairs where my boss was raising a glass to his victory. She ignored me, turned on her heels, and went to join the celebration. That moment, more than the impossible workload, was the dagger. It told me exactly what I was worth in this company. Nothing. I don't know why I stayed. Pride, maybe. Fear. Or maybe because I wanted one person, anyone, to admit I wasn't invisible. My screen was littered with broken formulas and my inbox with flagged emails nobody wanted to answer, and my chest with a weight I couldn't name. I whispered out loud just once, "I can't do this anymore." My voice cracked in the silence like a confession to no one. But the building heard me. The security cameras heard me. And so did the empty glass walls reflecting a woman who had given everything to a place that gave nothing back. Upstairs, the music thudded through the ceiling tiles. Laughter bled down the stairwell. I pictured them clinking glasses, HR perched at the edge of the leather sofa, my boss performing stories he'd stolen, retelling them as his own. Meanwhile, my hands trembled over a spreadsheet that didn't balance, a risk report with gaps wide enough to sink us, and I knew one thing with absolute clarity. They didn't just ignore me, they relied on it, because silence was cheaper than accountability, and people like me were expected to burn out quietly. I should have walked away right then, packed my bag, left the key card, let the numbers rot where they lay. But I didn't. Instead, I pulled up the policy binder no one else bothered to read, flipped to the section on compliance obligations, and memorized the clause that said, responsibility didn't disappear just because the boss had a glass of champagne in his hand. It was a small thing, a detail buried on page 73 of a forgotten PDF, but I held onto it like it was oxygen, because someday I knew it would matter that I remembered what they chose to forget. When dawn cracked pale and ugly over the city, I was still there. My desk looked like a crime scene. Coffee rings, paper scraps, an exhausted woman with a heartbeat louder than the copy machine. My boss arrived late, smelling of whiskey and smugness. HR trailed behind, heels clicking, makeup smudged just enough to tell me she hadn't gone home either. But not for the work, for the party. They breezed past me, laughing about how we pulled it off, and neither asked why my eyes were red or why my hands shook. Neither asked why the quarterly file was already uploaded, balanced, corrected, airtight. Neither asked, because to them it was magic. Work done by no one. Work that could be stolen, claimed, celebrated by everyone but the woman who did it. I sat there hollow, trying not to break when I realized I had become exactly what they wanted. Silent labor in the shadows. But something shifted in me. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a quiet recognition. If they could ignore me, then I could ignore their rules of loyalty. If they could look away, so could I. And the day would come when my silence wouldn't protect them. It would expose them. So yes, this is my story. If you've ever been the one they left behind, the one they laughed over, the one HR pretended not to see, stay with me. Because this doesn't end with me breaking. It ends with them breaking, and trust me, you're going to want to hear how. And before I go further, if you want more stories like this, if you've ever felt the same fire in your chest when someone underestimated you, make sure you subscribe and like. Because what's coming next, you don't want to miss it. The morning after that all-nighter felt like moving through glass. Sharp, transparent, and dangerous. My eyes burned from fluorescent light. My skin smelled faintly of stale coffee and printer ink, and yet I was expected to sit in the front row of the all-hands meeting like a proud soldier. My boss swept in late, hair still carrying the shine of expensive product, shirt crisp in a way that told me he hadn't touched his laundry in years. HR followed him, her heels clicking like punctuation marks to his swagger. They didn't look at me. They didn't have to. I was already invisible. The screen at the front of the conference room lit up with the quarterly presentation. Numbers I had bled over in silence now sparkled in blues and greens, packaged in sleek slides that my boss clicked through with an easy grin. It wasn't easy, he said, pausing dramatically, but we pulled it off. The room clapped. I stared down at my hands, nails bitten raw, and wondered if anyone noticed the tremor in my fingers. We pulled it off. A lie so clean, so rehearsed, it almost sounded like truth. Then came the joke. He chuckled, glancing at HR. Of course, some of us earned extra brownie points by burning the midnight oil. Isn't that right? HR smirked. Oh, we saw the lights on. Laughter rippled across the room like static. It wasn't laughter at the joke. It was laughter at me. They didn't see me as loyal or dedicated. They saw me as a fool who didn't know when to go home. My chest clenched, but I didn't react. Not yet. What they didn't know was that I had receipts. I had kept the email thread where he deleted my red lines, the calendar invite where HR marked herself supporting instead of attending, the timestamp metadata that showed exactly when the final file was uploaded from my account. My fingerprints were all over the work they celebrated. They erased my name, but they couldn't erase the trail. I didn't need applause. I needed patience. After the meeting, he clapped me on the shoulder like a benevolent king. Good hustle, he said, as if my work was a hobby project he found amusing. I forced a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Glad it all came together, I replied, my voice flat enough to skate on. HR watched me, her expression unreadable. But there was something in her eyes, a flicker of unease, like she knew I wasn't as broken as I pretended to be. I went back to my desk, opened a fresh folder on the encrypted drive, and labeled it Audit. Inside I mirrored everything: shared drives, Slack exports, calendar screenshots, every careless shortcut, every compliance gap, every approval given without documentation. I wasn't stealing. I was preserving. Like an archaeologist brushing dust off bones, I was uncovering the truth they thought would stay buried under champagne foam. But confession time. The worst part wasn't my boss. It wasn't even the humiliation in front of the whole team. The part that cut deepest was HR, because their job was to be the witness, to hold people accountable when the power imbalance got ugly. And she looked right at me, then looked away. That silence told me more than any cruel joke could. If it ever came down to my word against theirs, I was already marked disposable. I could burn the building down with my story, and HR would hand them the matches. That night, I didn't stay late. I didn't touch the red lines or the reconciliations or the endless churn of numbers. Instead, I poured a glass of water, sat in my dim apartment, and stared at the blank wall until my breathing slowed. Then I made a choice. If they wanted me to be silent, I would give them silence, but not the silence of compliance, the silence of strategy. The next morning, I submitted a test request to IT, a backup mirror of the shared drive, for reconciliation purposes. Routine, automatic, harmless. But I knew what it meant. Every deleted email, every revision, every metadata trace would live there. And if anyone ever tried to question what was real, that archive would answer louder than I ever could. I started mapping patterns, the late-night calendar entries, the drafts my boss sent to clients that mirrored my work word for word, the approval chains that skipped entire steps because someone was too busy at rooftop bars. I printed nothing. I forwarded nothing. But my mind was a vault, and the vault was wide open. When I walked past the glass offices now, I didn't feel small. I felt watchful, Like a camera nobody noticed, I smiled when I shouldn't have. At lunch, when HR walked past with her salad and sparkling water, I smiled. Not warmly, not cruelly, just enough to make her pause. She frowned, unsure why, because she didn't know that the woman she ignored at midnight had stopped asking for help. And when the ignored stop asking, they start planning. You don't really understand how rotten a company is until you stop looking at the headlines and start looking at the footnotes. Everyone else saw a thriving quarter, smooth presentations, champagne smiles. What I saw, what I couldn't unsee, were the cracks in the concrete, hairline fractures widening under pressure, ignored because they weren't pretty enough to put on a slide. Take the SOC controls, for example. On paper, every approval required 2 signatures, one from management, one from compliance. In reality, I had screen captures of entire chains signed off by the same 2 people, again and again, rubber stamped without even opening the files. The timestamps told the story. Approvals given 30 seconds apart in the middle of the night, long after those managers had logged out. And it was impossible unless they were ghosts, or unless their logins had been delegated to someone with too much access and too little oversight. Then there were the expense reports. You'd think no one would be stupid enough to pad numbers in a company audited quarterly, but they weren't padding. They were laundering. Subtle reclassifications. Dinners listed as client outreach. Bar tabs written up as market research. I compared the card swipes with the calendar invites, and the pattern was obvious. Nights billed as strategy sessions matched perfectly with photos posted to Instagram of rooftop celebrations. The same night HR walked past me in silence, half the leadership team billed their drinks to the budget I was breaking myself to reconcile. Even the numbers in the presentation had teeth marks. Revenue pulled forward from deals still in negotiation, contracts logged as secured, while emails showed clients pushing back, confused, or outright angry about missed specs. I'd seen the messages. This isn't what we agreed on. Fix it, or we walk. They glossed over it with colorful graphs, but I had the receipts, so I mapped it. Not like an angry employee scribbling notes in a diary, but like a forensic analyst laying out a crime scene. Slack pings cross-referenced with badge-in logs. Approval timestamps lined up with Uber receipts. My own emails marked as read, but replied to hours later with claims that the work was already handled. A web of convenience and negligence, strung together by people who thought no one was watching. And yet, the part that gutted me wasn't the lies themselves. It was HR's shadow in the background. Every chain had her name. Let's advise offline. We'll circle back, never taking responsibility, always diverting it. She had become a firewall, not for the employees, but for the people above her. And in doing so, she left me, and anyone like me, naked to the fallout. I realized then that her silence at midnight wasn't just negligence, it was strategy. The hardest pill to swallow. I knew they thought I'd cave, that I'd grow bitter, maybe send a resignation email, maybe cry in the bathroom one last time, and then vanish into obscurity while they kept drinking rooftop champagne. But they underestimated me, because while they were busy crafting lies for the board, I was cataloging truths for the future. One evening, when the office had emptied out, I spread my notes across the desk like puzzle pieces. Emails here, screenshots there, hand-drawn lines connecting them. It looked like one of those crime boards in a detective drama. And maybe it was. Only the crime wasn't blood on a floor. It was trust, numbers, the invisible currency that companies are built on. I whispered to myself, "You're not crazy. They're sloppy." The words steadied me. That night, I saved everything onto the company's own encrypted drive. No leaks, no personal copies. Just airtight compliance under their own policies. Because here's the thing, you don't have to steal the truth when the truth is already sitting in plain sight. You just have to make sure no one can erase it. The next morning, I came in calm. Too calm. My boss laughed. bragging about a closed deal I knew was still dangling by a thread. HR smirked, as if she knew some secret I didn't, but the real secret was mine. Every gap, every false signature, every fabricated win was already preserved, locked where no one could quietly delete it. And as I watched them swagger through the glass doors, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Not anger, not despair, power. The kind of power that doesn't need to shout, the kind that waits, the kind that knows rot can't stay hidden forever, not when you've already traced every crack to its source. The humiliation didn't come quietly. It came under fluorescent lights, in front of every peer whose respect I'd been clinging to like oxygen. It was the Thursday status call, the one that always dragged on too long, where everyone pretended they were aligned while secretly messaging under the table about how much they hated it. My boss stood at the head of the conference table, pacing like some motivational speaker who'd mistaken arrogance for charisma. He clicked through slides with numbers I'd spent sleepless nights fixing and spoke as if he'd conjured them out of thin air. Then he said it. And of course, none of this would have been possible without my team providing support. He paused deliberately on the word support, glancing toward me with a smile that wasn't a smile. A few people chuckled nervously. HR looked down at her notes, pretending not to see the way my shoulders stiffened. Support. Not strategy, not leadership, not even hard work. Just support. Like I was the paperweight holding his desk down. Like I was lucky to even be in the room while he basked in credit for work that had my fingerprints burned into every cell. I swallowed hard, tried to keep my face neutral. But then came the promise that broke me. He told the client, on record, that delivery dates would be moved up. Deadlines that were already impossible. Pulled forward 2 more weeks as if time bent for him. And everyone nodded because disagreeing in that room meant exile. I felt heat rise up my neck. My notes blurred. My pulse pounded so hard I thought the whole table could hear it. I wanted to speak. God, I wanted to. But before I could, HR jumped in with her soft, patronizing tone. We'll make sure communication stays professional, even when challenges come up. Professional? The word stung worse than the joke. It wasn't advice. It was a leash. A warning that if I raised my voice, I would be the problem. So I didn't. I let the silence sit. But in my silence, something shifted. It wasn't surrender. It was resolve. After the meeting, I walked back to my desk without a word. I could feel their eyes on me, some pitying, some smug, none of them willing to intervene. I opened my calendar and booked 2 meetings. Small, quiet, deliberate. The first was with internal audit. Not an official complaint, just an informal check-in about policy adherence, a way to plant a seed, to create a record that couldn't be erased as easily as an ignored email. The second was with the client's risk officer. A formal conversation, carefully phrased, strictly within NDA boundaries. No leaks, no accusations, just questions. Questions like, do you have visibility on the approval chains? And have you received the variance logs? Questions that made me sound diligent, cautious, professional, while quietly opening a door they didn't know existed. I sent no files. I shared no secrets. But the questions themselves were enough. Like the first tap of a domino, they didn't make noise yet, but they set everything in motion. That night, I walked home through a city that didn't care about my humiliation, my exhaustion, or my invisible war. Neon lights blurred in puddles, strangers brushed past me, and for once, I didn't feel small. I felt sharpened. I thought about the look on HR's face when she told me to mind my tone. The look on my boss's face when he called me support. They believed I'd stay in the role they'd written for me. The silent grinder, the late-night fixer, the one too scared to fight back. But they had misread me, because humiliation doesn't always break you. Sometimes it builds a fire you can't put out, and that fire doesn't burn in public. It smolders in the quiet, in the planning, in the questions that seem harmless until suddenly they aren't. That night, I opened my laptop, not to fix their numbers, but to draft something else. A resignation letter. Simple, clean, professional. Not dated, not signed, just waiting. A loaded chamber I could pull whenever I chose. And as I closed the file, a calm I hadn't felt in months settled over me. They thought they had broken me. They had no idea they had just handed me the match. The pivot didn't feel like revenge at first. It felt like paperwork. Dry, clinical, soul-sucking paperwork. The kind of thing nobody reads, but everyone signs off on because it looks official. And that was exactly why it mattered. I started documenting everything line by line, as if my sanity depended on it. Every gap in a spec, every missed handoff, every client email politely screaming, "This isn't what we asked for." But I didn't just hoard the evidence. I logged it in their own system. Issue tracker entries, remediation plans, status updates, all time-stamped, all routed through the same channels my boss thought he owned. No drama, no outbursts. Just cold, irrefutable traces. And here's the trick. I never made it look like an attack. I made it look like diligence. I set deadlines that were technically reasonable but impossible for him. On purpose, knowing full well he'd blow past them. Every refusal, every missed milestone, every wheel circle back went into the record with his name stamped all over it. If anyone ever looked closely, the pattern would be undeniable. I offered fixes, he dismissed them. I documented risks, he ignored them. I didn't have to sharpen the knife. He was cutting his own rope. I just made sure the knots were visible. Parallel to that, something else started moving. Recruiters, whispers. A message on LinkedIn from a competitor I'd respected for years. "If you're ever considering a move, we'd love to talk." At first, I ignored it. Felt too risky. But after the Thursday humiliation, I answered. Carefully, professionally. "Appreciate the interest. Not looking to move yet, but curious to hear about your current projects." The reply was swift, almost eager. "Let's set up a call. No pressure, just a conversation." And that's when the second track began. While my boss thought he was the only one scripting the story, I was laying the foundation for a rewrite. The competitor didn't need me to poach clients. They just needed someone who knew how to build systems that worked. And I didn't need to cross a single ethical line. I only needed to keep doing what I'd always done, document reality better than anyone else. One night, alone again under the sick buzz of office lights, I pulled up my drafted resignation. It sat there, patient, like a sealed envelope waiting for the right address. I added a line at the top, effective immediately upon delivery. Then I closed it. Timing was everything. Fire too early, and I'd be the bitter ex-employee. Wait too long, and I'd be complicit. But if I timed it right, if I timed it right, my silence would explode louder than any speech. So I built the trigger, a calendar reminder titled, simply, "Exit," set for the quarter close, the exact hour when the numbers would be scrutinized most, when my boss would be parading around with his glass of champagne, when HR would be glued to optics rather than substance. From the outside, nothing looked different. I still showed up early, still stayed late, still fixed the messes no one else could see. My boss called me reliable. HR told me to keep it professional. The team joked about how I lived here, and I smiled, nodded, let them believe it. Because the best snares don't look like snares. They look like habits. In reality, every habit was a thread in the web. Every polite email was bait. Every deadline was a silent countdown. I wasn't fighting anymore. I was positioning. Quietly, precisely. One evening, as I closed my laptop, I caught my reflection in the darkened office window. For the first time, I didn't see exhaustion. I saw calculation. And beneath it, something harder to define. Something closer to freedom. Because the truth was, I didn't need them anymore. They needed me. And the day would come very soon when I'd stop pretending otherwise. Quarter close was supposed to feel like triumph. That was the mythology my boss sold anyway. Late nights leading to rooftop parties, champagne glasses raised against the skyline. "We did it," echoing across the city. But the truth was different. Quarter close was a guillotine, and this time I wasn't the one under the blade. It began with a single request from the client's side. Please provide compliance attestation with supporting documentation. Simple, standard, routine. The kind of email my boss never read carefully because to him, clients were trophies, not watchdogs. But I read it, and I knew it was dynamite disguised as polite language. The file they wanted didn't exist, not in the way it should have. Approvals were missing, variances weren't logged, gaps yawned wide where signatures should have been, and for once, I didn't scramble to patch it. I let the gaps breathe. Upstairs, music thudded through the ceiling. I pictured them at the rooftop, laughing, glasses clinking, HR perched close to my boss like a shadow that had chosen its master. They thought the work was done, that the quarter was already locked. They had no idea the final act hadn't even started. I opened a new email, CC'd legal and internal audit, and attached a variance note. Clean, factual, unemotional. Not an accusation, an observation. Please see attached for outstanding items requiring resolution prior to certification. That was all. 20 words. 20 words that turned the guillotine rope loose. Within minutes, replies flooded in. Legal. Please clarify. Audit. Confirmed timestamps. The client's risk officer. We need this addressed before we proceed. And suddenly the music upstairs didn't feel so loud anymore. At exactly 9:12 p.m., I clicked open my resignation letter, the one that had sat in my drafts like a live wire. I signed it, dated it, and attached it to a short email addressed to HR, my boss, and the board liaison. Effective immediately. I resigned my position as analyst. For reference, please see policy numbers X, Y, and Z regarding responsibilities and compliance obligations. Best regards. No emotion, no explanation, just policy. Their own language turned back on them. Then I sat back and listened. The rooftop party faltered first. My phone buzzed with missed calls, then texts. Where are you? We need you in this call. What did you send? I ignored them. At 9:45, I logged out of the company VPN for the last time. My badge access would cut automatically at midnight. By 10 boss, audit had escalated. The variance note triggered a mandatory go, no-go review. The client froze recognition until documentation was cleared. Translation. Revenue couldn't be booked. Translation, my boss's bonus evaporated into smoke. At 11 APA, the board liaison finally replied, We'll need to discuss first thing tomorrow. HR's frantic email trailed right after. This is not the professional way to handle concerns. I laughed out loud in my dark apartment. Professional? I had been professional every day they ignored me. This was something else. This was surgical. By midnight, silence. No more calls. No more messages. Just the faint echo of a party cut short, like music strangled mid-note. For the first time in months, I slept. Deep, dreamless, satisfied sleep. Because I knew what awaited them in the morning. The mess I'd left wasn't sabotage. It was truth. And truth has a way of detonating louder than any accusation. They thought I'd leave quietly. They thought I'd break under humiliation. Instead, I walked out at the exact moment when my absence meant collapse. That was my reveal. My silence wasn't weakness, it was timing, and the clock had just run out. Morning broke like glass shattering. I wasn't there to see it, but I didn't need to be. You can feel when a storm you set in motion finally hits its mark. At 8:03 a.m., audit officially opened an inquiry. My variance note had triggered their obligations, full trace review of approvals, timestamps, and documentation. And once they pulled the first thread, the whole fabric unraveled. Missing sign-offs, duplicated logins, signatures that belonged to people who were on vacation at the time. It was all there, waiting, preserved in the very systems they thought I'd clean up for them. By 8:30, the client's risk officer refused to move forward. Until the compliance questions are resolved, our account remains on hold. That single sentence sent shockwaves through the building. The revenue my boss had already bragged about in his rooftop speech was suddenly toxic, frozen, unusable. Without it, his quarterly bonus vaporized. Without it, his credibility followed. At 9 Bowie, the board convened an emergency call. I wasn't on it, but people loved to talk, and soon whispers found their way back to me. They weren't asking, how do we fix this? They were asking, how did this happen? Who let this through? And the answers pointed in one direction. His direction? In HR? She wasn't spared. Every advise offline note, every documented instance where she'd acknowledged gaps and failed to escalate, landed squarely in the report. The irony was brutal. The same silence she had used to protect him now condemned her. She had become evidence. By noon, the rooftop champagne hangover had curdled into panic. Phones buzzed, emails flew, statements were drafted and redrafted. My boss paced glass halls, shouting about overreaction and miscommunication, but it didn't matter. Audit doesn't care about spin. Audit cares about trails, and I had made sure the trails were bright and undeniable. By 3, the client made their move. They didn't issue a press release, didn't send threats. They simply shifted the account, quietly, efficiently, to the competitor who had already been courting me. Not because I'd asked, not because I'd lobbied, but because they trusted someone who had shown them diligence when others offered only noise. And just like that, my boss lost more than revenue. He lost reputation. The one thing you can't buy back with favors or parties. By the end of the week, HR was transitioned out, a polite phrase for being removed before the rot spread further. My boss? Stripped of his bonus, then his title. The board chose survival over loyalty. He had become expendable. Meanwhile, I walked into a new office. Not glamorous, not loud, but mine. My badge opened doors without hesitation. My name carried weight without needing to beg. And the first contract on my desk? The very client they had mocked me for overthinking. Only now the specs were right. The process was clean, and the trust was mutual. It wasn't revenge in the Hollywood sense. No fiery speeches, no dramatic confrontations. It was colder than that, cleaner. They drowned in the silence they had forced on me, and I rose in the clarity of a truth they couldn't bury. That's what karma really looks like in corporate halls. Not lightning bolts, not headlines, just consequences, patient and sharp, arriving exactly when the people who thought they were untouchable finally looked down and realized there's no ground under their feet. The silence after the storm was almost unnerving. For months I had lived on adrenaline, waiting for the next insult, the next dismissal, the next midnight, where my worth was measured only by how invisible I could be. And then suddenly, it was gone. No late-night pings, no frantic calls, no hollow praise, just peace. I walked into my new office with a calm I hadn't felt in years. The walls weren't glass cages. They were solid, warm, human. People actually looked up from their screens to greet me. My badge clicked open doors without hesitation. No raised eyebrows, no questions of whether I belonged. I didn't feel like a ghost anymore. I felt seen. The first project on my desk was the client who'd once been shoved into my lap as a problem. Only now they weren't a liability. They were a partner. We built the program right, with controls in place, with transparency, with the kind of diligence that doesn't just meet standards, but restores trust. When their risk officer emailed a simple line, "Finally someone who listens," I stared at it longer than I should have. Because that one sentence weighed more than every hollow, "good hustle" my boss had ever thrown at me. Meanwhile, the old company tried to bury the fallout. They filed a quiet 8K about material weakness remediation. They reshuffled leadership. They issued scripted statements about renewed commitment to integrity. But none of it mattered. The damage was done. The champagne had curdled into vinegar, and no amount of spin could scrub the stain. I didn't gloat. There was no point. Watching them collapse wasn't about revenge. It was about validation. Proof that silence can be a weapon, that patience can be louder than rage. They thought ignoring me would erase me. Instead, it wrote me into every line of their failure. HR, the one who turned her back in that midnight hallway, was gone. Last I heard, she was pursuing opportunities elsewhere. My boss, stripped of his title, faded into obscurity. No rooftop parties, no applause. Just whispers about how quickly reputations rot when they're built on stolen credit. As for me, I didn't need whispers. I had a voice again. I spoke in meetings and people listened. I raised risks and people acted. I left the office on time, walked through streets that once felt hostile and now felt like mine, and realized I didn't have to justify my worth to anyone ever again. Sometimes karma doesn't roar. Sometimes it doesn't even whisper. Sometimes it just waits. And when it arrives, it's not fireworks or headlines. It's the quiet shift when the people who ignored you finally trip over the truth you left behind. So if you've ever been there, alone at midnight, ignored, humiliated, made to feel small, know this: silence isn't weakness. Silence is strategy. And when the time comes, silence is the loudest sound in the room. And if my story hit you where it hurts, if you've ever wanted to see karma land as cleanly as it did here, make sure you're subscribed. Because trust me, this isn't the only time silence turned into power.